Coming to you entirely pre-recorded from the Garage of Solitude here in Whitestone, Queens, I am Mario-Francisco Robles, and this is episode 7 of the Superman on Film podcast. Welcome to the show, Super Friends. We are currently 46 weeks away from the arrival of James Gunn's Superman. 46 weeks is where we're currently at here on this countdown, and I'm very excited to dive directly into this week's Superman on Film update, because there actually are a couple of things to discuss. So this week, a couple of the interesting things that have come out were, well, yesterday, James Gunn took to his social media threads and shared some pictures of Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen. Because you see, yesterday was the anniversary of Jimmy Olsen's debut in the comics. So we were treated to a couple of very cool pictures of Skylar as Jimmy. And the boy just exudes big Jimmy energy, doesn't he? He's just got that Jimmy Olsen look down in spades, and I don't know about you, but I am very excited to see what they cook up with together, what they come up with there for Jimmy. Because let's face it, Jimmy is one of these characters who's one of the most important supporting players in Superman's ensemble of characters. And yet in the movies, what have we really seen with Jimmy, right? We had the wonderful and charming Mark McClure handle him for the first 4 Christopher Reeve movies. We had the wonderful Sam Huntington playing him in Superman Returns. And you know, Sam will always be one of the great, what ifs, what might have been for me when it comes to watching Superman on film, because I thought he was magnificent casting as Jimmy. He gave off such Jimmy Olsen energy in Superman Returns, and yet he only ever got that one movie and a couple of key moments with which to shine. Just like Mark McClure, Jimmy Olsen only really had a few moments to shine, and really primarily in the first film when he's over having his misadventures at the Hoover Dam. But if you go to the comics, Jimmy Olsen has been through so much. He's gone through so many ups and downs, and his relationship to Superman is a very important part of the books. He's Superman's pal. He had his own comic book line. There have been times where he's been given superpowers and almost been a villain. We've had him become a turtle. We've had all kinds of really unique, bizarre things happen with Jimmy. And yet, in the movies, he's only ever just been the excitable guy with the camera and the bow tie. We haven't explored any of the levels and layers of what Jimmy Olsen can be, because he could also be a very important character for the story. He's the one very simple, basic human who's there observing all of these marvelous people. Because even though Lois isn't super, she's this intrepid, larger-than-life, incredible reporter, right? Even though Perry White isn't a superhero, he's this larger-than-life figure. He's the editor-in-chief of one of the most important newspapers in the country. And then you have Clark, who he admires as a reporter and thinks he's just the greatest guy. And he always has time for Clark, even when other people think Clark is a bit of a dork that you don't really need to pay any attention to. And he's also in awe of Superman. Right? He gets to see this flying man, and he is the fanboy come to life. In a lot of ways, Jimmy is us. Jimmy is our way into the story. He's the person watching all of these extraordinary characters do extraordinary things, and his reactions to things often mirror how we, the audience, feels. He is that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed sense of naivety and wonder. So Jimmy's an important character, and he can be treated as such. But on Superman on Film, so far, we haven't seen hardly any of what he's capable of, aside from just being an adorable little comrade in a couple of scenes, just a nice little chum to have a quick moment with Superman. But here's hoping that Skylar Gisondo gets a lot more to do as Jimmy in the years and years to come. Because once again, if you're watching the show, I'm flashing the pictures of him that James shared yesterday, and he's just got big Jimmy energy. That's the best way I can put it. I'm going to patent that. I'm going to put it on a shirt. Hopefully I don't get in too much trouble. All right. The other big thing over on the social media is that, you see, James Gunn was invited and tagged onto a thread over on Threads, where a fan put together a number of unique quirky DC moments and DC characteristics that he hopes to see adapted to the big screen or to the small screen when James Gunn's DCU officially kicks off. And amongst the items on this thread was about Martian Manhunter's love for Chocos, Chocos, the DC version of Oreos. And, when James Gunn responded to this thread, he didn't just, say that sounds neat. He posted a picture of Chocos, like an actual package that had been created, presumably for a currently in production DC Studios project, because you don't have props like these made unless they're going to be used or shot. So he posted a picture with the caption, "Gosh, DC is full of such fun lore. Can't wait to see some of these moments and the thousands of more like them on the big and small screen." So look at that. He can't wait to see some of these moments and the thousands more like them on the big and small screen. And he's already got Chocos lined up for Martian Manhunter. So that heavily implies Martian Manhunter is already part of some current DCU project. He's already going to be introduced as a member of the more expanded universe here that we're going to get to learn much more about and become much more linked to over these next 8 to 10 years. So let's see what that little tease amounts to. And in terms of other little bits of Superman on film update, there was also an interesting thing over on Threads where he was asked about members of the Guardians of the Galaxy cast and if there are any of them he would consider bringing over to the DCU. The exact question was, if you had the chance to cast any of the GOTG stars in the DC universe, who would you cast them as? And James said, well, that would be a spoiler, wouldn't it? So what does that mean? If it's a spoiler, it's already happened. And if it's a spoiler, that means it's not the one we've already heard about. Because, right, we've already heard about one Guardians cast member jumping over to the DCU. I covered that on last week's show, where it was made official that James's brother, Sean Gunn, the former Kraglin from Guardians of the Galaxy, is now officially Maxwell Lord in the DCU. So it can't be him, because it wouldn't be a spoiler. Everyone knows about Sean Gunn being in James Gunn's Superman. So this heavily implies that there's another member of the Guardians cast that is already in the DCU, and he cannot mention it because it would spoil something. Now, one of the big guesses here is Pom Klementieff, who played Mantis in the Guardians films, because there was already a rumor a couple months back that she at the time she was having conversations with Gunn about one particular character from the DC universe. Now, we never heard where those conversations ended up. We don't know if she was officially cast. It definitely has not been announced. So maybe it's Pom Klementieff, or maybe it's someone else. But let's let the guessing continue. I'd love to know who you all think. Let me know over on the Twitter at Superman on Film, which reminds me, by the way, I'm going to stick to Wednesdays as the day when I put up the poll for this week's topics. So if you want a chance to vote on what the next topic for the Superman on Film podcast will be, then by all means follow me over on X/Twitter at Superman on Film, and be sure to vote on the topics. I'd love to hear what you want as I dive my way through the topics that I've already got, because there's already so much to discuss when it comes to Superman on Film. But I just want to know what you want to know too, what you want to hear about. All right? Now, another update I'd like to offer you comes in the form of a video from the set of Twisters last year when David Corenswet received the news that he was Superman. When that news hit the set, the cast went bananas. And a clip from their reaction to David Corenswet's casting has made its way online. So I'm going to go ahead and share this 20-second clip. And even if you're not watching on YouTube, the audio itself is it's just wholesome. Enjoy. Here's the Twisters cast reacting to David Corenswet, cast as Superman.
Congrats! Let's go! That's our Superman, baby! That's our Superman, baby! Yeah! gonna try to fly! Oh no!
That sort of stuff always warms my heart. That's like I said, that is just pure wholesomeness right there. As you could see, they found out the news while filming the movie, and they couldn't be happier for the guy. And hopefully we will all be saying that for years to come. That's our Superman. That's our Superman. So yeah, just had to share that because I love those little moments. And the other big Superman on film update for the week isn't related to James Gunn's Superman, but it's related to the former Superman, Christopher Reeve. The beloved Christopher Reeve has a documentary coming out called Super/Man, and it's coming out at the end of September. It's going to have a limited theatrical run, but I assume it'll make its way over to Max streaming service. But for right now, it is set to be the first official release under the official DC Studios banner. And earlier today, the trailer for that came out, and boy, oh boy, I had me an ugly cry. I'm telling you, it's like a 3-minute trailer, and a minute and 20 in, I just started bawling because of the subject matter of the documentary. It looks like this is going to hit you right in the feels, and it's going to be the kind of documentary you cannot watch without a box of Kleenex nearby. Kind of like when I saw the Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary. This looks to be an incredible, substantial, and important documentary about a very important and wonderful man. So if you have not yet seen it, go online, look for the trailer for Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. It looks like it's going to be one for the ages. But now, let's go ahead and get into this week's topic. You voted, and the topic that won for episode 7 is Theory Time. What is James Gunn's Superman about? I'm basically going to be using the information we've been given thus far, plus the set photos that flooded the net between April and May and June, to try to put together some theories about the interesting things going on in this movie, what it is set to be about, what James Gunn seems to be trying to accomplish with this story, and some of my wide-eyed theories for what the tiny little details in some of these pictures seem to reveal. And if we're going to try to figure out what the film is about, let's go ahead and start with official statements made about the film from Peter Safran and from James Gunn himself. So in earlier interviews about the film, Peter Safran has made it very clear that Superman is not an origin story, but instead focuses on Superman balancing his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. He also refers to Superman as the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. He is kindness in a world that thinks of kindness, that thinks kindness is old-fashioned. I love that phrase. He is kindness in a world that thinks that kindness is old-fashioned. So that's what Peter Safran has said. And then when James Gunn has gone and discussed about what finally made him take the project, because he was offered Superman back in 2018 and turned it down because he couldn't find a way to, he didn't think he had a way to do Superman justice and to treat him with the respect and dignity that he deserves as the king of all superheroes. But a few years later, he figured out his way in. And in describing his way in, James Gunn said, in many ways, it centers around Superman's heritage, how both his aristocratic Kryptonian parents and his Kansas farmer parents inform who he is and the choices he makes. Now, that's very interesting. The fact that that was the angle that got him very much locked in on Superman. They made him go, you know what? I can tell this story. There is an interesting way to approach this mythology, and I want to go in through this way. Because it seems like more than anything, James seems to be fascinated by this idea of nature versus nurture. Where basically his upbringing is really and truthfully going to determine who he is and what kind of person he grows up to be. And it's interesting that he refers to the Kryptonian family as aristocratic, and then he talks about the Kansas farmer family, the Kents, obviously. When you hear aristocratic, that means, the top of society. Very important people making big decisions for the greater good. There's a little less emotion. There's more just thinking about, diplomacy, right and wrong, and making greater decisions for the greater good, but being someone who sort of sits at the top of society looking down, whereas you have the farmer Kent family who are much more salt of the earth, the working class, the people who make society run and have their own values and their own ethics for how to get through life and what a good life means to them. So it's going to be about this balance between these possibly sort of like holier than thou, aristocratic, upper crust society, almost royalty of the House of El on Krypton, and the salt of the earth. We're just happy to be here. We're going to roll up our sleeves, work our hardest, be our best, and try to help others. Kind of sensibility of those in Kansas, in Smallville, in the real sort of middle of America here, right? The backbone of our society. So it's going to be interesting because with the nature versus nurture too, you could go a few different ways. There have been times in the past where Jor-El has almost been depicted as like borderline villainous, where like he's like, listen, son, you're going to have these powers on this planet. You're going to be like a god to them. And at first you should try to inspire them. But if they don't follow your lead, then you should just take over and build a new society there and show them how it's done, because might makes right, and you are the strongest person there, and you should just basically take over. There have been variations of Jor-El that are a little bit more, it could lean into something almost dark and villainous. So it'd be interesting too if they went that route. I don't think they're gonna, but it's an interesting idea, right? Because like I said, there have been times when Jor-El's advice to Clark is not all just be the best possible person all the time, Clark. Sometimes he has had more of a, hey, if you have to subjugate them, you have to subjugate them. If you have to take control of that planet, who can stop you? So it would just be interesting. I don't know if they're going to go that way, but this idea of him having to sort of wrestle between the aristocratic parents and the farmland parents, it's going to make for something interesting, and it's going to tie into a theory I have later on. Okay. It also has me thinking too, because we haven't heard any casting of Jor-El, and yet everywhere we keep hearing about this balance between the Kryptonian heritage and the Earth heritage. And if that's the case, then you have to have the Kryptonian family present. So this tells me that the Jor-El casting must be a surprise. It must be something that James does not want us to know. Maybe that's the spoiler. Right? Maybe that's the spoiler from the Guardians of the Galaxy cast who might have come over to the DCU. Maybe he doesn't want to say who, because we're going to realize, oh, that person's Jor-El or something along those lines. Who knows? But all I know is you can't keep talking about how this movie centers on Clark grappling with his heritage and not have his Kryptonian family present. And if you're not going to have an origin tale, if we're not going to go to Krypton and see the actual origin story being told of Superman's voyage to Earth and who Jor-El really is and how we did all that, if we're not going to do that, then that means that our current Superman is going to be visiting a current form of Jor-El in that Fortress of Solitude and getting some kind of current advice from his Kryptonian, heirs. Not heirs, his Kryptonian descendants. So the fact that we haven't heard anything about actors cast leads me to believe that those actors were probably filmed quietly on set before they went and started filming off the sound stages. Because there were a couple of months where everything was being filmed on a soundstage. Before they went to Cleveland, a lot got shot, including the interiors of the Fortress of Solitude. So I have a feeling that someone rather important has probably been cast as Jor-El, and we'll see, but they're keeping it a surprise as of now. And in general, too, this idea that it's not an origin story is very interesting. It has me wondering if they're going to do something almost like what John Byrne did with Superman in the 80s, right? Because the John Byrne Superman books are one of James Gunn's touchstones. And he's mentioned this a lot, and the books are going to be included in the Superman Legacy box set of comic books that are coming out in preparation for James Gunn's Superman movie next year. So with that in mind, in John Byrne's Superman, what's interesting is we go really quickly through any kind of origin stuff. Within book 1, we tackle his arrival to Metropolis, and then we jump 5 years. It was a very interesting choice John Byrne made, where basically he said, all right, here's Clark, Superman arriving to Metropolis at first, and now we're just going to jump 5 years so we can get right into the meat and potatoes of Superman's career here on Earth. I don't want to waste time showing you the getting to know you parts of this story. Let's get right to a world where Superman's been around for a few years, and what impact has he really had, right? And with that in mind, that could lead you to believe that we're not going to see any origin story whatsoever. But it got me wondering, too, if maybe they might do a thing that's almost like the Edward Norton Incredible Hulk, where maybe during the opening credits, we might see a montage of visuals that sort of catch us up. And maybe it won't even go back as far as Krypton. Maybe it'll just start from his arrival in Metropolis, some sort of quick recap of what it was like when Superman first appeared on the scene. But then the crux of the story happens after a jump in time. A 5 years later type of deal happens. And that's really where this story takes place. So just because it's not an origin, that doesn't mean that they might not find a way to reference it in some way, right? Because, for example, BVS wasn't an origin story for Batman, but we still went back and saw his parents, Martha and Thomas, get gunned down, and we saw that pivotal moment, but you can't say BVS was some kind of an origin story. So, there might be a key flashback or two, or it might just be something that's handled very quickly, early on, very economically, and then we just jump ahead a few years. Because if you look at the set photos, and mind you, before we get into discussion on the set photos, I will not be sharing any of those in this episode, because they are technically not official. They are technically, I'm sharing something that's illegal, something that is illicit. So I don't want to do that. But I will be talking about the things that were seen in them. So with that in mind, if you're someone who's been avoiding set pictures because you want to go into this cold, you don't want to know anything, you don't want to have any crumbs as to what might be going on in this movie, then this might not be the episode for you. You might want to bookmark this one and come back down the line. If you're one of these folks who really just wants to go in completely fresh, completely cold. Because while I won't be posting the pictures, I will be talking about some of the insights gleaned from those pictures. Okay, but now, getting back to what I was discussing there with, the not an origin story, and diving right into a world where Superman's been around for a while, and we're going to start seeing his impact on the greater world, as opposed to this getting to know you phase. In the set photos, it is made very clear that he is not the only hero in this movie, right? We are shown many heroes. We see Mr. Terrific. We see Hawkgirl. We see Guy Gardner. We see members of the Authority show up. There's all kinds of metahumans who show up in this movie. And does this mean that they were there already and Superman is just the latest superhero to arrive? No, I really don't think so. That's why I think there's going to be something that establishes that he arrived a few years back, and now we're jumping ahead a bit to where now there are all these heroes and government agencies and private militias that have all been inspired by Superman's arrival, but they all have their own ideas for what heroism is and for what the right way to do it is. So, I just kind of wanted to point that out because my very first thing from the set photos is, wow, he really is walking into a fully realized DC universe. We as fans are walking into a fully realized DC universe with all these heroes here. And how are they going to explain it? Are they going to say these heroes predate Superman? I don't love that. I don't love the idea that Earth has had many heroes already and Superman is just the latest one to arrive and he's going to end up being the most important one, but he's just the latest. I've always liked it better when he's the first, when he's the one who inspires people to put on costumes and go out there and fight for good, so we'll see how that plays out, but that is my initial theory there, that the reason we see all those heroes is because there's going to be some kind of a flash forward where Superman's been around for a while, and we're going to see, what impact he has had on the world's concept for heroism and superheroism, and how accountable should heroes be for what they do and don't do. Do they need to seek permission from a government agency before they run in for help, or are they allowed to just do whatever they think is right to help? I feel like we're going to tackle all of these kinds of unique moral conundrums. But okay, now let's go ahead and talk about one of the very first pictures that was released. And this one I can show you because this one isn't illicit. This picture was from the first day of principal photography, and it was released by James Gunn himself. So there's a picture of them in Norway. And this is where they have the Fortress of Solitude taking, this is where that scene will be. And what's interesting about this picture is that when you look at it, it is all just crew members, save for 4 people. There are only 4 members of the cast there, because you have to imagine too, they're not going to send the entire cast. They're only going to send the cast that is involved with the Fortress of Solitude there. And what's interesting is the cast members that you see, one is obvious, right? We've got David Corenswet, so that makes sense. Superman would visit his Fortress of Solitude. But look who else is there. We have got Lex Luthor. We have got his Eve Tessmacher, his girlfriend. And we've got the engineer there. So we have Superman, Lex Luthor, Lex's girlfriend, and another villain, all there at the Fortress of Solitude set. So that is very, very interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen this before. We've seen where Lex is so obsessed with Superman that he finds a way to track his flight patterns and figure out where it is that he goes when he disappears after committing a good deed. And eventually he is able to track down where the Fortress of Solitude is. He did that in Superman 2. He did it again in Superman Returns. So I feel like it looks like we're revisiting that idea where Lex is going to go out there. And just like he did in that movie, he brought his girlfriend with him. Remember, he brought Miss Tessmacher with him in Superman 2. And in Superman Returns, he brought his girlfriend Kitty Kowalski with him, as well as his henchmen. So he never travels alone when he's out there. So once again, he's out there with Eve Tessmacher, and he's out there with the engineer. So right away, that implies a link between Lex Luthor and the Authority. So that right there is already somewhat possibly spoilerific. So that's why, like I said, if you're trying to avoid spoilers, this is not the episode for you. But the fact that both Lex Luthor, who we know is the primary villain of this movie, and the engineer, who is a member of the Authority, are there, that tells you that something's going on where the bad guys have found Superman's home in this movie already, right? And what could they do there, right? In the older films, right? Lex Luthor, Gene Hackman went there and he basically just learned a bunch about him. But when Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor went there, not only did he learn, but he stole something, right? He took the Kryptonian crystals that his father had bestowed upon him, his inheritance from Krypton, these crystals that contained all the collected knowledge that Jor-El had in mind for his son to learn and that he was going to need to, follow through on his mission here on Earth. Lex stole those because he was going to try to create his own new Krypton here on Earth and try to destroy Earth and be the ruler of this new Krypton in a rather harebrained scheme that made a lot of people go, what the hell are we doing here, Superman Returns? Is this really the best you could come up with, Bryan Singer? But I'm going to save a lot of that for the Superman Returns episode of this show when we get to it. But with that in mind, so Lex goes to the fortress. Do we think he stole something? That's what I think. I think it would be very interesting if he made his way into that Fortress of Solitude and came across the very incredible artificial intelligence that runs it. And what if he finds a way to download that AI? Because he realizes, you know what? Superman has this incredible artificial intelligence that helps him, but all of mankind could benefit from this. Hell, Luthor Corp could benefit from this. This could be our big AI breakthrough. And he downloads it onto some kind of device, and he starts using this AI to create tools that could hurt Superman. And what if we find out at the end that this AI's name is Brainiac, and we're setting up Brainiac as the big bad for a future film. And at first we think, Lex is just playing with a power that he doesn't even fully understand yet. He thinks it's just this great alien artificial intelligence that's going to give him this leg up, and that if he can just learn to manipulate it, then he'll be one of the most powerful people on the world, and he'll bring the Man of Steel to his knees. You can imagine all of that, but then you can imagine Lex in his hubris misplaying this entirely, and the Brainiac AI outsmarting him. And that's what brings Brainiac to the forefront and makes him the primary villain in a sequel or a later sequel. So, there's lots of interesting ways to go with this, but the fact that Lex and the Engineer and Eve Tessmacher were all, flown to Norway to film at the Fortress of Solitude set, that tells me that they're up to no good. They've been to the fortress, they've learned something, or they've stolen something, and it's all going to connect back to Lex Luthor and or the authorities' plot to take Superman down. And also, now let's go to my next theory. Let's talk about Eve Tessmacher herself, right? Because this trope of the big villain having the cute ditzy girlfriend, it is a Superman trope that we've seen on film several times now, right? And we had Lex Luthor with his Miss Tessmacher in the first two movies with Christopher Reeve. Then we even had that Richard Webster character who was the villain in 3, who was invented for Superman 3. And he had his ditzy girlfriend, who I can't remember her character's name, but we all remember when Superman had his evil phase and he went and flirted with her, and who knows what they did when he visited her in the middle of the night. But right, that villain had his ditzy girlfriend. And then in Superman Returns, we had the wonderful Parker Posey in there as Kitty Kowalski, who was once again Lex Luthor's paramour, who's a little ditzy, but perhaps a little smarter than she seems. And then even in the Zack Snyder movies, right? Lex Luthor had his female counterpart. I'm forgetting her name right now, but he had his female counterpart in Batman versus Superman, who I believe died in the big explosion in the court scene. So, he's very good at taking care of his staff. But, so we've seen this trope before of the villain with his female assistant who may or may not be more than she seems. And what I find interesting about the specification of her name on this one, right? Because in the first movies, she was Miss Tessmacher. And if you were just going for a straight up homage to that movie, you could just call her Miss Tessmacher. But zeroing in on Eve makes me feel a certain kind of way. Because when we hear Eve, I don't know about you, but I think of Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman. And it makes me wonder if Eve Tessmacher is Lex Luthor's first woman. And I don't mean first like his first girlfriend. I mean she's like his first prototype. Like, he built her. Like, she's more than she seems. Like, at first, she's just going to seem like Lex's ditzy girlfriend to us. But then there's going to be a twist where we find out where maybe he goes behind her and opens a flap behind her head and fixes something. But I have a feeling that Eve Tessmacher is more than meets the eye. I think she's the first woman. I think she's some kind of Kryptonian android that Lex Luthor has created in some way. Maybe she's a gender-bent Metallo with a kryptonite heart. I don't know what it's going to be, but I have this feeling that Eve Tessmacher is much more than meets the eye. That's just a theory. Let's see what happens. But I've thought it since the moment they announced her name and kept locking in on Eve Tessmacher. Now, speaking of other interesting things too, right? So we know that the engineer goes out to the Fortress of Solitude, but we also know that she's a member of the Authority, and the Authority, I should say, was pictured in the set photos taken in Cleveland. And what were they doing? They had Superman in handcuffs. He was arrested, being escorted away from some rubble by members of the Authority. And there was one particular member of the team that got people talking quite a bit. There is a dark figure that looks a lot like, what's that? Black Noir from The Boys, whatever his name is. But this dark figure actually looks a little like Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe's too. But again, I'm not going to post the pictures, but you could look them up. It's a dark figure with a black mask. You can't make out who they are or what they are underneath this black disguise. But what you can see is something that looks an awful lot like the Ultraman logo on his chest. And that's got people thinking, is this Ultraman, right? And if you don't know who Ultraman is, there have been several variations of Ultraman, but the core thing that has been used many times when using this character and bringing him into Superman media is that he is basically a lab-raised, lab-created clone of Superman, who is an evil Superman. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, here we go again with another evil Superman type of story, right? But listen, I think this is all going to tie in to that nature versus nurture theme that I brought up earlier. Okay? I think we're going to have something where, imagine Lex Luthor went to the Fortress of Solitude. Lex Luthor downloaded the Kryptonian AI that has all of Jor-El's teachings in it. Lex Luthor works with the Authority. And while they're creating this clone of Superman, they're downloading nothing but the Kryptonian heritage down onto him. And he turns out to be an evil dictator type of character. He turns out to be an evil Superman because this lab-raised Clark didn't have Jonathan and Martha in Smallville to teach him the other side of that balance, the other side of that coin about how to do things the right way. So I think it's going to be an interesting sort of dichotomy where towards the end of the movie, when that hood gets ripped off of his head and we finally see who it is, it's David Corenswet's face. It is an evil Clark that was manufactured in a lab by the Authority because Superman would never work with them because they work for the government. They are a government superhero agency. And since they can't get Superman to work with them, they decide to create their own. And through a partnership with Lex Luthor, using what he learned from the Fortress of Solitude, they teach their version of Superman all of the Kryptonian tricks, all of the Kryptonian way of life. And he actually ends up evil because of it, or at least morally corruptible because of it. Whereas our main Superman never went that route because thank goodness he had Jonathan and Martha Kent there to teach him the other side of the coin, to make sure that he always understood the other sides of the story and didn't behave in a rash, violent, crass, excessive manner. So I feel like it's going to tie in that sort of way to the nature versus nurture thing, this thing about Ultraman. Because if you look too, Ultraman seems to kind of be a physical presence towards Superman. He's holding his arm. He's the same height. He's jacked. And I'm telling you, when that hood comes off, that's going to be David Corenswet again. It's going to be Ultraman, or perhaps this universe's version of Bizarro. Because there's lots of, we've tackled the evil clone of Superman in the past. And who knows, they could go the Bizarro route where Superman eventually doesn't have to kill this Ultraman, but this Ultraman suddenly does learn the error of his ways and becomes some kind of an anti-hero. Who knows? There's lots of ways to go with it. But I think the point is, we're going to get an evil clone. We're going to get a clone that only got half of the nurture that our Superman got, and therefore he went dark while our Superman remained the embodiment of goodness and kindness. And we're going to owe all of that to his farmland parents. That's what I think that's all about. And that's what I think the Ultraman with the black mask arresting Superman is all about, Then my other thing is about the suit itself. Okay, because if you pay attention to the suit, it gets damaged in these set photos. And that's something we haven't seen before, right? The Christopher Reeve super suit never got tattered or destroyed, right? It got a darker shade of blue and red and yellow in Superman 3 because he got that weird kryptonite that they had created, and it had that adverse reaction to him. On him. But we've never seen the suit actually be destroyed. Same thing in Superman Returns, nothing destroyed it. In the Henry Cavill Superman movies, the only time we saw the suit take any kind of battle damage was when Doomsday stabbed him in the chest at the end of BVS. But that was the only time we've seen a super suit on film that could be destroyed. Because by and large, the super suit has been established as coming from the Fortress of Solitude. It is indestructible Kryptonian material, just like he is. So up to now, that's been the case. But in these set photos, we see a suit where the S has been blown off. We see all kinds of fire damage. We see, there's some scenes there where it looks like the cape has been ripped off of him, although it's possible they're going to add that back in CG. But the point is, this doesn't appear to be a Kryptonian suit. And I find that very interesting, because what if they go the route that this first suit that we see him in is homemade? What if Martha made it? What if that's why it's a little bit baggy? What if that's why it takes damage? Maybe what if that's why it's so kind of like thick and non-traditional from what we're used to? Because they're thinking like Earthlings. They're thinking we need a strong, durable material to protect our sun. We need, they're using just the best material that they could get their hands on. And if his mother Martha made the suit, there's only so much she can do when he's out there fighting supervillains. The suit is going to be damaged. And my theory regarding the suit is that throughout the movie, he'll be wearing, for the most part, his homemade suit from Mom. And maybe we'll even see earlier incarnations of it. It might be a subplot that it keeps getting wrecked and he keeps on having to go back to the farm to get a new one. And each time he goes, Mom and Dad have come up with a new way to make this one tougher. Now it's flame retardant, son. Or now we've used some steel threading so it won't tear. You can kind of have a montage where he's been trying his best, where his parents have been trying his best to give him a suit that'll be durable and last. And I think at the end of the movie, he's going to get a suit that is properly from the Fortress of Solitude, that is properly from Krypton. And the reason I think that is that if you go all the way back to the very first image released of Superman from this production, it is the iconic close-up of the S, right? And the iconic close-up of the S, when you look closely at it on this first initial image, there's a couple things that spring out at me. First of all, when you look at it, It looks huge. It covers the entirety of his chest. If you look at it, you could even see the grooves of his pec muscles. You could see his full chest beneath that S. Very Alex Ross-ish. You could see his pec muscles. You could see that the S indents a little bit in between his pec muscles. So this thing is really big, really tall, and really wide. And if you look at the lower right corner of the image, it looks like it almost goes to the edge of his chest, because you can see where the side of his body ends. So this emblem seems to take up all of the chest, and it also has that snow on it. And where would the snow be from? The snow would be from the Fortress of Solitude. Okay? I wonder if this is from one of the final scenes of the movie, where after, almost losing a battle and going through some kind of dire straits, Superman goes to the Fortress of Solitude, has some kind of moment with the AI that's there with his parents, and where Jor-El reveals to him that we know that your Earth mother and your Earth parents have tried their best to clothe you in our ways, and they took the symbol of the House of El and put it on the suit and all that. But here is something actually from your home world. And he's going to put that on, and that will be the final suit. That will be the suit that doesn't take battle damage. That'll be the suit that fits him right all the time. Who knows? Maybe that version of the suit, since it's alien and not from his Earth parents, that one might not have the red trunks. That might be some way that they explained the red trunks, that early on, his mom made the suit and she had this idea of the kind of old-fashioned strong men that she grew up seeing in comic books and watching on TV. And when she designed her son's suit, she designed it to look like these strong men from the circuses that she used to see. But then when he gets the real suit from Krypton, what if it looks much more straight up like the New 52 one and there isn't red underwear on the outside? Who knows? Again, these are just ideas. But to me, if you just look at the S's, if you look at the one that's on his chest in the original image, which is also, the first full body image, I should say. If you look at that S, if you look at the S's from the set pictures, and then you compare it to the original S that was released, the texture looks different, the size looks different, the suit looks snugger, and the S looks like it takes up almost all of his upper torso. Very Alex Ross. And on top of that, the pose in that initial shot that has the snow on the chest is very, it looks like he's standing in a hero pose, chest out, arms to the side in full Superman glory. And he's got, and there's the snow on it because he's out there at the Fortress of Solitude debuting his Kryptonian suit for the first time. That is my big wide-eyed theory there when it comes to the suit, when it comes to the S that we've seen so far across all the pictures that have been released. And my last theory centers on this idea of the film exploring the many ideas of heroism, because we have not one but two different groups that are going to be interacting with Superman throughout the movie. Two different groups of superheroes, and yet neither one of them are, traditional ones that we would ordinarily root for. It's not Justice Society. It's not Justice League. It's the Authority, who seem to work for a government agency, right? I think it has to be governmental in some way, because why would Superman allow them to arrest him, right? He's walking around with the handcuffs, but that, handcuffs don't work on Superman, right? He's obviously, he's going with them voluntarily. And that tells me he would only go along with this voluntarily if it was, if the Authority was acting under the authority of the United States government. And since he, Superman wants to be on the right side of the law, and he wants the president to trust him, and he wants the people to trust him, he would willingly surrender to the Authority if he had to for some time. But then the other group, right? This is the group that involves Mr. Terrific and Hawkgirl and Guy Gardner. And there's another hero in there or another character possibly that's all CG. We saw someone walking around in a full body green sock, meaning they're either going to get covered up as another character or they were just there to facilitate some special effects. Who knows? But that group, right? The group of Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, and Mr. Terrific, they all have Lord Tech logos built into their costumes. And that means that this group is more of a private superhero militia, right? If the authority works for the government, Lord Tech works for a corporation. They work for Maxwell Lord. And in real life, I know it sounds crazy, but there are private armies. There are private militias. There are, it happens. And it makes you wonder if Lord Tech is going to be, a hired group of corporate heroes, where at first we're going to think, Maxwell Lord is possibly a good guy and he's here to save us. He's like an Elon Musk who, here, I have my group of heroes and, they're always around. And when they put heroes away, when they put bad guys away, those bad guys are never seen again. When Superman puts them away, he puts them in prison and they break out again. Like you could see Max Lord as some kind of influential figure who puts forth his team of heroes trying to basically, win the PR war and show that his team is the cooler team and you should buy their merchandise and you should do this and that, and they're going to have their own outlooks on what it means to be a hero. I also think that within that group, it seems that Superman and Mr. Terrific have a special bond. Because if you look at some of the set pictures, you don't see Superman interacting much with the other heroes, but you see a few candid moments between him and Mr. Terrific, where you could see maybe it's Mr. Terrific who's like, yeah, this group kind of sucks, and I kind of don't want to be here anymore, and this Max Lord guy, it's not all it's cracked up to be, But either way, I feel like, we're going to be playing with this idea that all these different entities have all these different ideas for what it means to be a hero, for what it means to protect others, and what the true responsibilities of a protector are. And the authority is going to be very much, by any means necessary, we decide what's best for the greater good, and we have full autonomy to act on that, right? And that's not Superman's way, and then with Lord Tech, it could be all about the attention. It could be all about the image. It could be all about trying to hire people to be heroes. And we'll even give you tech to make you super. And it's all this sort of like phony synthetic, just for the attention, just for the clout, just for profit kind of superheroism. And it's going to take Superman as that true blue, old-fashioned, iconic, classic hero who his approach will be the one that prevails over all of them. But he's going to be entering a world where all these different heroes have their different ideas for how to get it done. And it makes me feel like, again, I've brought this up before, I think a lot of this is going to be James Gunn's way of attacking superhero fatigue. Addressing the fact that we're inundated with superheroes everywhere we turn. Every few months, there's a new superhero movie coming out. There's a new superhero TV show being announced. You see it on film. You see it on TV. You can't avoid superheroes. And I feel like part of the point of this will be, yes, there are many, many heroes. And we've gotten kind of jaded and tired and cynical towards them at this point. But there's only one Superman. And in this story that the film will tell, Superman will show that his way, his brand of heroism is going to be the one that prevails. And his brand of heroism is going to come from finding that perfect balance between what his parents from Krypton wanted of him and what the Kents wanted of him. And I think that's ultimately where we're going here. So there are my theories. There are my theories as of now for the themes, for the interesting kinds of characters we're going to meet and the impact that they're going to have on Superman. Here's some of what I think Lex Luthor is going to be up to in this next movie, now that we do know that he is considered the primary villain of James Gunn's Superman. And hopefully you enjoyed this little theory spiral of mine. As more bits of information come out, as more pictures are released, as more interviews take place, I'll be sure to share with you any other interesting theories I have about this movie. But that about does it for episode 7 of the Superman on Film podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please like, rate, and review. It really helps the show to grow, and it is very, very much appreciated. And be sure to follow the Superman on Film Twitter/X account so that you could vote for next week's topic on Wednesday. The polls will be going up on Wednesdays. All right. So until next week, life is chaos. Be kind. Up, up, and away.